This video is now in session, and the Wisconsin Senate race is an interesting race to watch for 2022. Currently, the incumbent senator for Wisconsin is Ron Johnson, and he's been serving in the U.S. Senate since 2010. His seat is up for re-election in 2022, and it's interesting because we don't know whether he's actually going to run, and if he is going to run, we don't know how that would impact the race. So, at least immediately speaking. So, let's dissect what's happening with the Wisconsin race bit by bit. So, Democrats in Wisconsin are already starting to fundraise against Ron Johnson, because this Wisconsin race is going to be a pretty important one if Democrats want a good majority, a healthy majority, more than 51 seats through Pennsylvania. And that would easily, speaking, involve North Carolina and Wisconsin. This race, particularly for the Republican primary, is indicative of whether the Trump wing of the Republican Party can win, or if the more moderate / establishment wing of the Republican Party wins it. So that is determinative of Ron Johnson actually running for the Republican ticket. He was once a more establishment Republican. Now he's more of a Trump Republican because of his alignment with Trump's views on social issues and as well as cultural issues. That is why even before he has announced that he was going to run, he received an endorsement from Donald Trump. And that's pretty important because it shows that both Donald Trump would want Ron Johnson to be the ticket for the Republican Party once again, but it also shows that he wants Ron Johnson to run in the first place, because Ron Johnson has actually been questioning whether he should run again or not, and whether he runs or not is actually going to, in our opinion, it's not going to change the ratings as much. It might make it a little bit more democratic, but ultimately this is going to be a contentious race because Ron Johnson is more for Donald Trump rather than distancing himself from that. And that's important because in the 2020 election, Wisconsin voted for Joe Biden by, even though it was less than a percentage point, with 0.63%, it's still a win for Joe Biden against Donald Trump, and thus it would be much more beneficial for Ron Johnson to go against Trump rather than to be with him, because he's an incumbent senator, he's a Republican, he'll most likely win the primary if he runs again, regardless of if he completely supports Trump or not, and he would then ride a midterm year that might go against Democrats. So, as a result, Wisconsin would then stay red. But now that he has aligned himself with Trump more and more, it's actually getting more and more contentious. And if we don't have any polls quite yet, actually, I mean, we do have one poll between Ron Johnson and Tom Nelson, in that Tom Nelson wins, but this is a Democratic pollster, so it's not quite accurate. That said, based on the rankings of Cook Political Report and Sabata's Crystal Ball, they regard it as a lean Republican, and depending on who the Democratic ticket is, then that could change. That could completely change how this rating would go. Currently, Tom Nelson seems like he's going to win. Obviously, it's too early to say, but he is the favorite at this moment. And he has been in politics before. He was the nominee for lieutenant governor and the nominee for Wisconsin's 8th congressional district. That said, I'd say though that based on these losses, that might not prove a good track record for him, but we still just have to see what kind of race the Democratic primary turns out to be. Now, how did Ron Johnson win in the first place? Because that is very important to know about the competitiveness of the 2022 race based on past precedent. So, as I mentioned before, Ron Johnson was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2010, and 2010 was a wave year for for Republicans, completely a wave year. Even though Democrats still had the majority in the Senate, they lost a lot of seats in 2010, including the Illinois special race where a Republican won. So if we go over to Wisconsin, Ron Johnson won by 4.8 percentage points against Russ Feingold, and Feingold was the incumbent U.S. senator. If we look at here, he received 47% of the vote, and in 2004, he received 55.3% of the vote. So it showed that Ron Johnson was able to win under a wave year. And in 2016, Donald Trump won in Wisconsin, so that helped propel Johnson to win by 50.2 percentage points, which is less than the amount he received in 2010. As you can see, Russ Feingold ran again, which was a very bad decision on Democrats. The reason why it's an incredibly horrible decision to run a former U.S. senator who lost against the incumbent U.S. senator is because usually a state doesn't want to elect that person back into office. That rarely happens, and almost every single time that person loses. So because Russ Feingold represented Wisconsin in 2004 and Wisconsin threw out Feingold for Johnson in 2010, he was almost guaranteed to lose in 2016, even if it was a close election. He lost with 46.8 percentage points, which is less than the amount he had in 2010, which was 47%. So as you can see, Ron Johnson benefited from the ineptitude of Democrats in 2016 and a Republican wave year in 2010. But now is a more of an even playing field, even though a Democratic president is in office. And 2020 and midterm years are usually a wave year against the president's party, so it would be a Republican wave year. For the Senate, that rule doesn't apply as much, so we could see an opportunity for Democrats to go against Ron Johnson on an even playing field, as long as they aren't inept about who they elect as their ticket, and if Ron Johnson continues to be the Republican ticket. That said, there's an opportunity for Ron Johnson to not run for re-election. Obviously, that would go against Trump's will, but it would actually make this seat easier for Democrats, but just by marginally speaking, because Ron Johnson is already not a good candidate for Republicans in Wisconsin, and by removing him, it wouldn't change too much. It would favor Democrats a little bit more, because obviously there's not that incumbent advantage, but it still would be a contentious race for Democrats to have. And if Democrats do in fact take Wisconsin, that would give them 52 seats. If they have North Carolina, that's 53 seats. That actually gives them the opportunity to do the stuff they want, like removing the filibuster. Even though that may be politically bad for them, it might get their bills passed. The other thing is that if Democrats win 52 seats, then they could somehow try to get DC statehood, as the people who are against it, mainly Kirsten Sinema of Arizona and Joe Manchin of West Virginia, their votes would not quite matter, and Kamala Harris would break the tie. But that's all contingent on if Democrats are able to win Wisconsin and/or North Carolina, and those states are harder for Democrats to win than in Pennsylvania, especially as Democrats don't have the star candidates like they do in Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, they have John Fetterman, who's very loved by his constituents. He's the lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania, and the other major candidate is Malcolm Kenyatta. He also has a lot of support. So they don't have those types of candidates, but we'll see how these candidates do as they progress through to 2022. That's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.